Okay, this is our week 2 labor and safety lecture for our HR class. Employee safety is a major concern for human resources. For example, in 2015, we had over 3 million people injured and roughly 4,700 people were killed in the United States. There are 3 guiding sets of safety laws that HR needs to comply with, and they are workers' compensation laws, which vary state by state, OSHA, which is the national guidelines on how to keep a safe and healthy work environment, and then the Department of Labor, which has very generic guidelines, which we are not going to cover because OSHA and workers' comp get more detailed on both of those. The good news is injury and death rates are falling every year in the United States, so we are getting better at keeping our employees safe. A little bit on workers' compensation. So in the early 1800s, if you hurt yourself, you were kind of in trouble because you had to pay for it and you got no income, and the lawsuits always failed because if you did anything to get yourself hurt, we weren't going to pay you. And if a coworker hurt you, we weren't going to pay you. It had to be a company issue. You did nothing wrong. Nobody else did anything wrong. Basically, like the HVAC system fell on your head. And even then, they'd try to say that you did it or your coworker did it. In the fire of 1911 in New York City, 100 women were killed. You may or may not have seen the pictures. You can Google it. It's pretty gruesome. There's 100 bodies laying in the streets of New York covered in sheets. And it was so gruesome. And the fact that it was women in the 1900s, it sparked an outcry of we have to keep our employees and our women and our husbands safe. And we had the first workers' compensation law. Only 47 states have mandatory workers' compensation programs, meaning the employers have to provide it. All 50 states have some variation of how it should be provided, but they don't necessarily make it a law that employers have to do a certain percentage or a certain withholding for their employees. They all vary wildly. I mean, the ways that a state enforces workers' comp is anything from Wyoming, where the state runs it and all companies just give a certain percentage of their payroll, to DC, where it's run almost on an employee by employee basis and the employer is taken out of the equation. So you have to figure out what state you're working in to figure out your workers' compensation laws. The goals of workers' compensation are pretty clear. They want to make employees safer. They want employees to invest in their own safety. They want to provide care, and they want to provide a no-fault system. So you can get fixed, and then they'll figure out who was at fault. So it used to be you paid your medical bills, and if it was workers' comp, you were reimbursed. Now they do it the other way. We assume that it's going to be paid, and if you did something wrong, you'll have to reimburse. The benefits of workers' compensation are, again, pretty straightforward. We allow total disability benefits. So if you get hurt at work and you can never work again, we'll give you partial replacement of income lost. If you are impaired, we will give you money while you're hurt. One of the rules in some industries is we know how much we're going to pay you for a body part. So if you lose a finger, we know that that's $5,000. If you lose an arm, that's $20,000, and that sort of thing. It's sometimes in the contracts. For example, oil workers or roughneckers, they sign that in their hiring contract. This is how much we'll pay you if you lose an appendage. Survival benefits will allow a burial allowance and income benefits if death occurred because of a workplace safety issue. The medical expense benefit is what we normally think of with workers' comp. They're going to pay the doctor visit for me to get fixed because of being hurt at work. And then sometimes there's rehab and even voc rehab. Vocational rehab is you have to learn a new job because you can't do the one you used to have. And then the company focuses on safety. Workers' compensation is really expensive, almost twice as much as health insurance. So if a company has a lot of workers' comp claims, they invest in safety not only because they want their workers to be more safe, but because it is costing them a fortune in premiums. So with that high rate, the initiative to make your place more safe is there because of this workers' compensation fee structure. And then because we are HR, we want to make sure that we are minimizing fraud in workers' comp. This is one of the largest areas of fraud that HR has to deal with. We publicize that the company investigates all cases of suspected fraud. So this is like when you are trying on clothes in a store and it says shoplifters will be prosecuted to try to make you think twice before you do it. That's what this is. We tell you that if we suspect fraud, we will investigate to the full extent of our capabilities. It is not, Sarah, we will investigate you, and broadcasting that to everyone. It's more of a general announcement. We educate employees about workers' comp system, how it works, who's covered, what's covered, how the process works, and we make sure that they understand it. We also communicate with employees who file claims. Does the story stay consistent? If somebody's lying, their story will change over time. The problem with this is how we communicate. We do not want to come off as we suspect everyone that files is fraudulent, but we also don't want to be over trusting and have our fees go up. We will also want to communicate with others familiar with the incident. What did they see and hear when the injury occurred? Is it consistent with what the employees who's filing is claiming? And then we stay in contact with the employer or employee while they're on leave. This does two things. It shows you want them to return to work, which is a big issue. We don't want people that get hurt at work to feel like they're not welcome back. And we make fraud cases more nervous. If you think about it, if you've ever lied and then someone's being really nice to you, you get more guilty. It's a little bit of psychological nuances here, but you do want to make sure that you are extending the communication with them through that time. Honestly, again, it's to make sure their story stays consistent and really just so they know that they're welcome back and the company cares. Another benefit that isn't mentioned here, but I know for a fact we considered in HR, is we don't want them to sue us above and beyond workers' comp. They got hurt at work. We're paying for their health benefits. We don't want them to sue us for wrongful injury or mental scarring. So we're really trying to be as nice as possible. We hurt them. We need to be nice to them. This last bullet here, companies are fraudulent too. We deny workers are actually hurt. I watched a guy walking across the lawn of my place of employment, probably in 2003, and he was looking at a clipboard and walking, and I saw a pothole, and I said to my coworker, I was like, he's going to step in that hole. And sure enough, he stepped in the pothole, fell, hit his head, and his hard hat cut his forehead. So I watched the whole thing happen. It was obviously just a klutzy move, but that's workers' comp. He got hurt on our property doing his job. We should have fixed the pothole, that sort of thing. But the employer above me, so my boss at the time, was trying to say, but that wasn't our fault. He was the klutz. He should pay for it. We shouldn't have to pay for it. So it's those kinds of things where it was clearly workers' comp, and the employer just didn't want to have his claims go up and was trying to deny it. Luckily, those of us that processed the paperwork and were actually in charge of human resources disagreed with him and filed the paperwork appropriately. But that sort of thing happens sadly often, as does workers' comp claims. Oh, my back. And there's no really way to prove pain. I can prove a broken bone, but I can't prove that you're not in pain. So it's very easy to have workers' comp fraud issues. Okay, now we move on to OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Act. Most of you have heard of OSHA. If you work in certain industries, you've probably went through OSHA training or safety training. But this is a federal law that requires employers to provide a safe and healthy work environment, comply with specific standards, and keep records of injuries and illness. We really want to make sure our employees can come to work and leave in the same condition. We don't want them to get hurt, sick, injured, anything like that in our place of employment. They give us general provisions, but they cannot cover all scenarios. So many of their requirements are keep office supplies stored and out of the way. They can't tell you to keep your push pins in a drawer so nobody stabs themselves, or put your paper boxes in a corner so nobody trips over them. They have to make generic claims like office supplies stored, so they can apply it to each and every scenario. We must be familiar and comply with all laws as human resources. Now, the problem with OSHA is their books are hundreds of pages long. And then if you do multiple things in your building, you might have 2 or 3 OSHA books to cover different sections of your plant. And you need to know where they overlap, where they stand alone. It gets very confusing. This last bullet is why employers lose OSHA lawsuits. 8 or more employee companies must have records. So if I have 9 employees, I better have records. I have to keep them for 5 years. They must be posted for all employees to see. Normally, this is a 3-ring binder that is in somebody's office that you can ask to see. This last bullet is the tricky one. Must record accidents that could have caused injury under OSHA laws. Have you ever slipped and fallen and not hurt yourself, but you're like, woohoo, that was a close one? You have to write that down in the OSHA book, because if it's slick, we need to address that. We need to fix it so somebody actually doesn't get hurt. And that's the part of the could have got hurt. Well, I technically could get hurt anytime doing anything. So what is that gray area? When in doubt, write it down was a good rule. And usually it's something that if you felt it was a significant enough story to share with somebody, not just a funny, oh, I slipped, ha ha ha, but oh, that floor over there is really slick in the mornings when it's been raining. You should write it down so it can be fixed. But what happens is the OSHA inspector will be on site and he'll say, this area seems slippery. Has anybody ever mentioned it? And if it comes out that they have and it's not in the book, you just got an OSHA fine. This one, the documentation always trips up human resources. 8 or more employees kept for more than 5 years, and incidents that may have caused injury under OSHA laws. Those 3 things, it's really hard to comply with, especially because how often do you report things that you just feel like you are kind of klutzy? I trip over that cord every day. You should probably report that. Okay, moving on. OSHA enforcement. So we have occupational standards and variances. We know what we should be doing, but we can ask OSHA for a variance, which is an extension for up to a year. And then we can ask for another one and another one and another one. As long as we're documenting that we're asking for an extension, we can keep getting them for, I want to say forever. I know there's probably a limit, but I know at one company I was with, we were at 8 years and we still were asking for extensions because it was so expensive. We couldn't afford to do what we needed to do to be compliant with the new law. They are very good about working with you and walking through different scenarios and how you can become compliant. The inspections can be scheduled or unscheduled. Now, they're asking to search your workplace, so you can require a search warrant if it's an unscheduled search. But honestly, all they have to do is drive back to the courthouse, get handed the search warrant, and come back. So you are just delaying for a couple hours this search, because as soon as you say, do you have a search warrant? No, go get one. They know you're trying to hide something. However, this does give you a couple of hours if you know you had a couple of areas that need to be cleaned up. This is really shady. Your company should hopefully never do this, but I have seen it. If you get a citation and a penalty, it can become a criminal penalty or a substantial fine. So OSHA has told you repeatedly, this is a hazard. They find you, your fines have went up, and then someone dies, you can get charged with involuntary manslaughter as the person in charge of that station or a company officer. I've seen safety directors be arrested. I've seen CEOs be arrested for these kind of things when someone dies because they knew it was a problem and they hadn't fixed it. The good news is OSHA will give free consultations, and this is not their enforcement arm. They have another arm where they will come out and they'll walk through your new location or your small business, and they'll point things out that you might not have thought of as a small business owner, or as a HR person that doesn't really understand all the OSHA violations, and show you, well, you really need your eye wash station over here instead of over there for compliance with this law. And all they do is give you a write-up of what you need to fix. There are no violations. Even if they walk in there and your employees are juggling knives while standing in a puddle of water with sparking electricity, they're just going to give you a letter. However, they have been known to give you a time frame. If you did actually have that juggling knives electrocution scenario, they would tell you, we're going to ask enforcement to come out here in a month and check on you. So they won't just let it go on forever. Be like, oh, great, you're really unsafe. I hope you have a scheduled or unscheduled appointment sometime soon. They can trigger the investigation side if it looks really, really unsafe. So that was OSHA. Now we're going to talk about some items that are also covered by OSHA, but they're not so much slip and fall accidents or chemical incidents. They're more specific. AIDS has had 50 cases of work-related diagnoses and another 114 that are suspected but not proven diagnoses. If you get AIDS at work, you are now ADA covered. So Americans with Disabilities Act, if you remember from last week. This takes you straight into another level of workers' compensation. We cannot ask about your AIDS status before hiring, but we can test you and question you about it as soon as you are hired. In some fields, we need to know your HIV status because of what you'll be doing and how you'll be doing it, especially if you work with bloodborne pathogen standards. We need to know what your standing is before you come in contact with blood and bodily fluids of other probably patients in that scenario. There are numerous standards in place to protect you from being in contact with other employees' blood. If you're doing CPR, you should be doing a mouth guard. If you have first aid for a fellow coworker, you need to put on gloves first, and these sorts of things. We're really trying to protect an employee that might be helping another employee from having this occur. So luckily, with only 164 diagnosed or suspected cases, this is a very infrequent occurrence, and this is not per year. This is ever documented since we discovered AIDS, 164 cases. The next thing, you'll notice that the title of this slide is Safety, Health, and Behavioral Issues. Employee sabotage is a safety issue. It can be directed at a person or property. So if I have to fire an employee or discipline an employee, we can have revenge-driven sabotage and disgruntled former employees. This is why some companies will walk out people that they've terminated. You don't get to go collect your items. You don't get to go and work out the rest of your day. We're going to walk you out of the building. We need to get you out of your workplace. In this category, I have seen some of the most childish, juvenile, scary items that I've ever seen in human resources. People get really mad when they get even just a bad review is what I've seen has triggered some sabotage issues. And then being fired, it can get really scary sometimes. So there are usually policies in place for handling disgruntled employees, which we will cover in our staffing later. But we need to understand this can happen and what are our policies. We change our codes to get into certain rooms every time an employee is let go. That was a policy at my previous employer. We walk employees who are fired out the door with security every time. No exceptions. We have to get them out of the building to keep our employees safe. And we'll keep our cars in a locked parking lot so we don't have to worry about them breaking car windows or keying our cars and that sort of thing. It really does happen quite often. Next, we have workplace violence. 521 homicides in 2009 were employees killing other employees or being just killed at work. This does include assault, threat, and sabotage. 70% of employers do not have workplace violence policies in place. They have harassment policies, they have sexual harassment policies, but not straight violence. 26% of women identify themselves as victims of domestic violence, and this is a leading cause of workplace violence. It happened here in Wisconsin with the Azana Day Spa in Brookfield in 2012. A woman left her husband, and they had a really awful relationship by all accounts. And she finally left him, said it wasn't worth it, and she went to work at this day spa. Her husband, estranged husband, I should say, went to the McDonald's right next to it and just stared at the day spa for about 4 or 5 hours. And people thought it was a little weird, but whatever. People linger and loiter at McDonald's. He walked across the parking lot, went in there, shot his wife, his estranged wife, 6 other people, and then himself. 4 of them died, including the husband and wife. Those other 6 people did nothing other than show up at work, go in for a salon makeover, hairdo, whatever. How do we keep our employees safe from each other? How do we keep them safe from something like this? 2 million people every year are victims of some sort of workplace violence. Your coworker punches you, all the way up to you were shot and killed at work. What are our policies? How do we know if someone's just having a bad day and they say, oh my gosh, I could kill you? Are they kidding? Are they being serious? Do we need to open a ticket? Do we need to, report it to HR? Do we need to call the police? Do we have a policy in place? Do we have a zero tolerance policy in place? How are we going to protect our employers? How do we report this? So if my coworker tells me that she is being abused by her husband, should it be mandatory that I report it to Human Resources? Because as I stated earlier, domestic violence does lead to a majority of these workplace violence issues. What's the right answer here? This is what HR will struggle with in how to keep you safe versus how to keep your private life private. We really want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, not only for employees that might be having problems at home, but employees that are having problems with each other. So this one is really a sticky issue for Human Resources because it's really hard to gauge what we can and can't do, what we should and should not do in terms of finding out what's happening and reporting people for what they say, think, feel, that sort of thing. A couple more health and behavioral issues. If a woman is pregnant, we cannot discriminate against her because she's pregnant, but there are certain policies in place to protect the fetus, and they can cause conflict. If you guys have seen those commercials that this drug shouldn't be handled by pregnant women or women who may become pregnant, what if you're the manufacturer of that chemical? You can't have women working on it if it's going to cause major birth defects. You can't have women working with lead if they're pregnant because it causes major birth defects. You can have conflicts of we can't discriminate against the woman, but we have to legally protect the fetus. I remember a case with a bullet manufacturer back in the 80s that barred all women from working on the lead floor because it could cause significant damages to pregnant women and women who could become pregnant. There were about a dozen workers who went and got themselves sterilized. They had already had children. They didn't want more children. And that was their loophole to keep their job. It was a huge lawsuit, and I don't honestly remember how it went at the end, but they were stuck. They couldn't discriminate, but they had to protect the fetuses and the potential fetuses. So that one's really hard to comply with. Hazardous chemicals. If there are chemicals that can hurt you, we have to tell you what they can do to you. Well, this one will make you blind. This one will turn you into Spider-Man. Whatever it does, we need to make sure that the employees are fully informed of what the chemical can do if they're exposed to it. And then genetic testing. Employers used to genetically test employees to see if they would get sick in the future and to see if they had any tendencies that might impact the workforce. It's now illegal. We can't do it. But for a number of years, this was a health issue. We wanted to make sure that we weren't at a higher risk for having folks on our health insurance that were going to have major genetic issues. Obviously, we don't do this anymore. Those are all of our safety issues. Now we're going to go into a couple of laws that we've put in place to protect our employees. The first one is sexual harassment, which went into place in 1980. which covers unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. This is harassment when the submission to conduct is a condition of employment, submission or rejection of conduct is basis for employment decisions, or conduct interferes with an individual's work performance or creates a hostile or offensive work environment. You want to date your coworker. If you ask them out on a date, is it sexual harassment? Unless you keep asking and then start making jokes and then asking again. Now we're into that third bullet of you're creating a hostile or offensive work environment. And we also caveated this law a couple years ago and included this could be same sex or opposite sex. Women could sexually harass men and vice versa. Because when this law was written in 1980s, it was just for men sexually harassing women. And that has changed now to, it doesn't matter the combination of genders, you can still be sexually harassing your coworkers. So there are a couple different kinds of sexual harassment. Quid pro quo is basically, if you do this sexual favor for me, I will give you this job-related benefit, a better shift, a raise, a promotion, I'll hire you, that sort of thing. The other one is a hostile work environment, when sexually based language or behavior is upsetting, offensive, or undesirable. So the second one often comes into play, not because I was telling a coworker a crude joke, but because a third coworker overheard the joke and felt it was upsetting or offensive. Because if you think about who you tell jokes to and who you're the most rude and offensive with, it's usually friends who aren't going to have an issue with it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be telling them those jokes, hopefully. It's the third party, the person in the next cubicle that has to hear your offensive jokes every day that doesn't think they're funny. When a sexual harassment claim is made, we consider 4 things, both at the work level to see if you're in sexual harassment, non-compliance, and at the jury level if it goes to court, because you can be sued personally for sexual harassment above and beyond any work-related repercussions like termination or discipline. How frequent was the behavior? You tell one horrible joke and it's really offensive and really upsetting, that's not sexual harassment. That's you made a bad decision. How severe was the behavior? A joke is one level. Grabbing someone's backside is another level. Attempted rape, obviously most severe. Was the conduct physically threatening or humiliating? That one it's pretty self-explanatory. And then fourth, does the conduct interfere with the employee's work performance? So this can be one of 2 ways. This one is the reason we have you can't date coworker policies. If you're dating your coworker and it's a beautiful relationship, love, little birds flying around you, happy, you break up. All of a sudden your work performance is down in the dumps and you are constantly crying in the bathroom because your ex is calling you and saying, why can't we get back together? I love you. Let's get back. Now he could be or she could be considered sexually harassing you because your work is suffering because they're trying to get back with you after a breakup. I have honestly seen that one more than any of the others. You would think that when you hear sexual harassment that it's the groping, the jokes, the unwanted advances. It's honestly usually the result of employee dating is what most of the policies I personally saw. The relationship ended badly and one of them still wants to be with the other one, and I have to go in there and intercede, and it's very awkward for all 3 of us. It's a bad idea. So we consider those 4 in a mixture. There's not really a formula, but if I say it was one joke, it's probably an internal discipline issue that could be anything from a don't tell that joke again. Really, what were you thinking? Kind of a conversation to if you have a 0 tolerance policy, you could be fired. Companies can make this as strict or as loose as they choose. So if you're being harassed, but it's not sexual in nature, this is, in 1993, we had to expand it. Unlawful verbal or physical conduct that denigrates or shows hostility or aversion because of protected class membership, and that purposefully intimidates or creates a hostile or offensive work environment, has purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with a person's work, or otherwise affects an individual employment opportunity. The first part says because of a protected class. Well, guess what? I can frame it that every single person in our class is a member of a protected class. We all have gender. We all have race. We all have national origin. So as soon as you start picking on someone consistently and you make their work environment hostile or offensive and it starts impacting their desire to be there, that's it. Their desire to be there, you're harassing a fellow employee. You have one coworker that you pick on every single day for eating tuna fish, which is disgusting and smells horrible, but every day you pick on them and you get a little louder, a little more obnoxious about it. They can hit you for harassment and make some claim that they eat tuna fish because of it being they're Catholic and it's Lent. You didn't know that. You just thought the tuna fish stunk because it does and it's disgusting, but that's my own personal bias. You can be in trouble for harassment. This also has legal implications beyond just being fired from work. You can go to jail for harassing an employee. And all you have to do is get to the point where they don't want to come to work because of you. This is a catch-all bucket that is used by human resources to get rid of jerks. You are being consistently hostile to this person or this group. We can find a way to frame it that it was because of a protected class, even if you may or may not have been thinking of that when you were harassing them, for your information. So some other HR safety policies that should be in place at your employer are emergency plans. Guaranteed they all have an evacuation plan posted somewhere. If the building catches on fire, here's where you should go. If we have a tornado, here's our safe room. Here we don't really have earthquake policies, but there is an evacuation route, and hopefully you know where you're supposed to go once you leave the building. Hopefully you have this at your house too. If the house catches on fire, we'll meet at the mailbox. If the office catches on fire, we'll meet in parking lot A. That sort of thing. You want to make sure you have a plan in place in case of an emergency. One of the new emergency plans, because of workplace violence, is active shooter plans. If there's an active shooter, what do you do? Where do you go? What is our policy? And we have that all listed, and hopefully you are training our employees on that as well, not just having it written in our employee handbook that nobody ever reads. We want to have a way to report employee concerns, an email, a phone number, a procedure, something. I noticed that the floor is wet and really slippery. Who do I tell? How do I report that? I think that the building really smells like mold, and I'm concerned that there's mold in the walls, which is a complete health concern. Who do I tell? That sort of thing. We want to stress common sense when encountering a potentially dangerous situation. Common sense is not so common is a famous quote that I love, but you want to make sure to tell them we don't want heroes at the workplace. If you see something dangerous, don't try to fix it. Tell somebody, walk away, give it a wide berth, whatever it is. Don't try to catch the bear. Just go tell whoever we identified as the concern that there's a bear in the building. So you want to stress common sense and give a couple of examples, probably not the bear one. Most of us aren't going to encounter a bear in our office, but you want to make sure that you're stressing common sense and not being a hero. Everyone protects themselves should be your policy. You want to keep clutter out of the way to prevent falling and injury. Honestly, my first ever workers' comp case, the girl had the messiest cubicle. I mean, you couldn't even see the desk or most of the floor. And she tripped over something, and when she put her hand on the desk to catch herself, a staple in a paper went into her thumb so deep it struck the bone because of clutter. Keep your office space clean. And then the last but most important is we follow up on all safety concerns and we document them. We want to make sure we told the employee how we fixed it, if we fixed it, why we didn't fix it, and then we have documentation of all of that. Because again, OSHA requires it, and we want to make sure that we have documentation in case anything comes of it later. Now we're going to move on to unions. So we have basically the two topics this week, employee safety and then employee labor. And employee labor in the United States, what I'm talking about are labor unions. So the AFL-CIO is the largest union body in the USA, and it covers everything from the Screen Actors Guild to Teamsters driving trucks. It's really every union in the nation rolls up to AFL-CIO. There are 14 million members in the U.S. as of 2015, end of 2015. It peaked in the 1970s in power and membership. It's been in decline ever since. The median worker income comparison, union members earn $980 a week. Non-union members earn $776 a week. And then you can see the membership information. In 1980, it was roughly 20% of the United States was a member of the union, and it's fallen down to 11.1% as of 2014. So why? Why is it declining? Well, we're moving away from union industries and into non-union industries. We used to have a lot more manufacturing jobs, and with automation and outsourcing, those jobs have went away. Government work has also cut back, and we've moved into service sector. 60% of our GDP in the United States is now service sector jobs, and most of those are non-union industries. If you work in a public sector, you have a 35% chance that you work in a union. In the private sector, it is now down to 6.6%. One of the reasons that was given was that unions have failed to modernize products to meet changing labor needs, and the contractors are no longer needed. If you think about why unions were formed back in the 1800s, it was to protect our pay, to get us safer work environment, and to overall make sure that we were getting everything we needed out of our employer. Most of those ideas are now covered by OSHA and the Department of Labor and other governing bodies. The unions didn't really modernize. So another reason are legal changes. Wisconsin and Indiana, if you remember, Scott Walker and the unions, pretty much 2010 through 2013, they made it no longer mandatory to join a union at the place of employment. It used to be if you were a teacher in a K through 12 school in Wisconsin, you had to pay membership dues, even if you didn't want to be a member of that union. So they broke that, and union membership fell 13% in Wisconsin and 11% in Indiana the years that those were passed. It was also the expansion of firms into non-union states. Boeing is one of the largest union employers, and they have started moving out of Seattle and into states like South Carolina that are not union friendly. Volkswagen is doing the same. They've stated they're getting the same quality of work because Americans still have a high quality of work, but they're being able to bring in their contract prices roughly 20% lower because they're not having to pay union dues. So those three ideas are the main reasons that have been stated for the decline in union membership down to roughly 11% of the workforce. Now, some of the benefits of unions, they are a political force in our country. They donated almost $20 million in the 2012 election cycle. They mostly give to the Democratic Party because they are more favorable to workers rather than corporations. There were a few exceptions, but most of that $20 million went to the Democratic Party in 2012. In 2014, they only spent $12 million, but that wasn't a presidential cycle, so it's expected to drop quite a bit. And as I stated earlier, you get almost $204 more a week as a union membership. As a union member, and that's $10,000 more a year. So that, as a worker, is a huge incentive. For the employers, there's less turnover and there's simpler negotiations. You have a contract, so you're not allowed to negotiate on a one-to-one basis on pay and promotion. You're negotiating with a group, which honestly does make it simpler. You don't have to go, Bob, Sarah, Janice. We're just saying, all right, all workers are getting a 1% raise. There are more benefits to employees. Members of unions usually have higher healthcare rates. That is changing, but we don't know the exact data now with Obamacare. We don't have all the Affordable Care Act information to know what the actual insured rates are. But for a long time, it was roughly 96% of union workers were covered with health care, and roughly 50% of non-members were covered. And then you also have increased training, usually with unions versus non-unions, and a couple other benefits to employees.